the real reason is because they don't want you to know that they're stealing from you. That's really the main thing. Central bank-backed fiat money is rather complicated, and most people have no idea how it works. I mean, like these are people that are in Congress, or like maybe even work for the Fed and stuff like that. They don't
Yeah.
understand how any of it works. And they purposefully keep it that way because it lets them steal way more resources from the people if people don't actually understand how it works, which is why you get sort of weird explanations of what the Fed does or how it works or what it's supposed to do when you take like macroeconomics classes in college and so on. But mostly it's so that they can pull the wool over your eyes and just pickpocket you while they do it. And that's the harsh and uncomfortable truth that a lot of people aren't willing to face up to because in a sense they grew up in this sort of system and they don't want to know about all of that. And the sort of knowledge level about money is just so lacking everywhere in the world. Like very few people understand how central banks create money. They don't even understand how their own bank works, right? Like what fractional reserve lending is or anything like that. So in a sense, Bitcoin is the first sort of um, system where you're incentivized to learn a lot about that stuff. And once you do, it just makes way more sense to use something like Bitcoin.
Hello, guys. Welcome once again to BitCorner, the podcast for Bitcoiners from El Salvadorian to the world. Today, we have the big pleasure to have Jimmy Son here. So, Jimmy Son, welcome and thank you for your time. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you, Jimmy. So, I want to be very respectful with your time. So, we're going into the subject, right into it. So, um, as I was telling you before we begin the podcast, there's not a lot content in Spanish, and the all the education and all the content that you provide to us is really valuable, but most of the time it's in English. So I want the El Salvador community and even the Latin American community get to know you guys because you're making such a great job. So to start with the show, can you please introduce yourself and a little bit and tell us about your background a bit?
Yeah, sure. I'm a programming geek, right? I've been programming since I was like 9 years old. I've been on computers since I was 9 years old. I've been programming professionally since I came out of college, and that was almost 25 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I've been programming in some capacity for a very long time, and it was I think 12 years ago that I first found Bitcoin and having sort of dabbled in it for a while, I decided to go sort of full time into it sometime in 2014. And since then, I've written a bunch of books, one for programmers to help them, understand the Bitcoin protocol. Another few books from various different perspectives. The Little Bitcoin book from a more sort of like human rights perspective. Thank God for Bitcoin, which is from a Christian perspective, and Bitcoin and the American Dream, which is from a regulation political standpoint. So I have a lot of books to my name. I've been writing a lot. I do a lot of different things. It's not too easy to classify exactly what I do, but it's I guess easiest for people to think of me as a coder that happens to do podcasts and write articles.
And I want to ask you, you said that you're a programmer, so how do you switch or when do you switch to Bitcoin? Because, well, or a better question would be, how was your rabbit hole journey, and when do you thought like, okay, this is legit, I want to do this because I think this is really valuable, such as
Yeah,
yeah.
so I first heard about it in 2011, and
Mhm.
when I heard about it, for most people, it takes a while to sort of like get used to the idea. And usually the first instinct for a lot of people is this is a scam or something like that. But I was fortunate because I had the right background to understand it. I was a math major. I've been a programmer a long time. So I understood reasonably how Bitcoin could work. And then the other side was the economic aspect, which I think in many ways is more important. I studied some Austrian economics and how money comes into existence and stuff like that after 2008. So when I first heard about Bitcoin in 2011, it really kind of clicked almost right away. That doesn't mean that I bought Bitcoin right away, but I did sort of learn about it. And a couple of years later, when there was a sort of like the second Bitcoin bubble, it went from somewhere around $10 to 266 in a matter of like 4 months. That's when I really sort of started thinking, okay, I need to learn this at a deeper level. And that summer and later that fall, Bitcoin went to 1100, and
Mhm.
I was doing some programming work, doing some open source stuff, and I was getting paid for it. Interestingly enough, from a guy in Ukraine. And I was getting paid in Bitcoin. So immediately I was like, wow, this is awesome. I'm programming. There's no middleman. There's no company, and this guy's just straight paying me to work on code. So that was sort of my first exposure to Bitcoin, I guess, as sort of this transnational currency. And soon after that, I decided, okay, I really need to make this my career. I need to do something that incorporates this into my life because I was already pretty obsessed with it. And I worked for a few different Bitcoin companies afterwards, and it was a rewarding experience. And then eventually, I went off on my own to teach courses to show developers how to program Bitcoin and so on.
Oh wow, that's amazing. You mentioned that you studied economics, and actually, I have a question about it because
Mm-hmm.
why do you think that we didn't get, and still, I think new generations, like Z generations, they still don't get in college or in schools, even in universities, the real story of money because we don't get that perspective. I mean, we don't. Most people don't know about Bretton Woods Agreement. I'm
Uh-huh.
okay. I do, but because I love the Second World War history and
Mm-hmm.
everything. But even but that time when I was watching documentaries about the Second World War, I didn't get exactly what was the Bretton Woods Agreement. It was until
Mm-hmm.
Seyfedin with his book and we
Mm-hmm.
got the real story of money. Why do you think that any system, because I have talked with people from around the world, and every single system, and even their countries, we don't get the education about the real story of money. What do you think is that?
Well, the real reason is because they don't want you to know that they're stealing from you. That's really the main thing. Central bank-backed money is rather complicated, and most people have no idea how it works. I mean, like these are people that are in Congress, or like maybe even work for the Fed and stuff like that. They don't
Yeah.
understand how any of it works, and they purposefully keep it that way because it lets them steal way more resources from the people if people don't actually understand how it works, which is why you get sort of weird explanations of what the Fed does or how it works or what it's supposed to do when you take like macroeconomics classes in college and so on. But mostly it's so that they can pull the wool over your eyes and just pickpocket you while they do it. And that's the harsh and uncomfortable truth that a lot of people aren't willing to face up to because in a sense, they grew up in this sort of system and they don't want to know about all of that. And the sort of knowledge level about money is just so lacking everywhere in the world. Like very few people understand, you know, how central banks create money. They don't even understand how their own bank works, right? Like what fractional reserve lending is or anything like that. So in a sense, Bitcoin is the first sort of um, system where you're incentivized to learn a lot about that stuff. And once you do, it just makes way more sense to use something like Bitcoin.
I want to ask you another question that I think is more important, especially right now. And what are the difference between, now that you mentioned central banks, between CBDCs and Bitcoins, and why people should be concerned about it?
Yeah, CBDC stands for central bank digital currencies, and they are sort of like a central planner's wet dream. They love the concept because they can control almost every aspect. And they're the more authoritarian the country, the more enthusiastic they are about CBDC. So, for example, China is very strongly into CBDCs, and for good reason. It's very efficient from their perspective. If you think about it, they're already sort of a massive surveillance state, and they want to keep tabs on what their citizens are doing. They want to be able to sort of like shut down a riot that happens in one area or something like that almost instantly. And you saw a lot of this authoritarian control during COVID. Now, what CBDCs let you do is essentially cut out the middleman. Right now, the middleman in any sort of like central banking system are commercial and retail banks. These are the banks that you go to get a loan or to, get a mortgage or, deposit money or whatever. And most governments, what they do is they deputize these banks to have them report back to them on the activities of each person. So there are all these things called AML KYC laws, anti-money laundering, and know your customer. And the idea is that the bank is regulated and they have to report certain things to the government. So in the United States, for example, any transaction above $5,000 that you conduct through a bank, they report to the government, whether it's the IRS or other agencies. There's probably multiple ones. But this is kind of inefficient, right? Because there's this bank sitting in the middle and you have to make sure that they're in compliance and you have to collect data from them. It's in all kinds of different formats and whatever. What you could do with a CBDC is have a direct relationship with every single citizen. So this is the plan that China is planning, which is instead of having a checking account at Wells Fargo or, ABN AMRO or whatever bank, you have an account instead at the central bank. And that's your account. And now they know everything about you, including everything that you buy, everything that you use money for, which is pretty much everything. Yeah. Instead of having to use banks to get all of that data, which they're getting anyway, but this will make it so much more efficient. So that's the sort of like world we're going to see with CBDCs. People are going to have, the government's going to have all of this data, which is, first of all, a giant honeypot that a hacker can go in and do something with. But second, they have all of that data. They can figure out that you're buying books that they don't like or something like that. Yeah. It's a huge encroachment on civil liberties. So that's the real danger of CBDCs. Now, Bitcoin doesn't have a central controller. It's decentralized, and if you're careful enough, any transaction that you do is more or less untraceable. Now, you have to know what you're doing to get that untraceability, and maybe sometimes you don't care, right? Like if you're buying a coffee, it's okay if somebody's willing to spend a lot of money to figure out that I bought coffee, whatever. But there's this ability to stay off of the radar of central banks and so on, which is what makes it so valuable, and which is why so many services like VPNs, take Bitcoin. It lets them like not have to know anything about you. And this is something that I'm seeing a lot more of as I travel, is that a lot of countries are sort of not just using banks now, they use telephone providers or cell phone providers to learn a lot more about you. If you want like a SIM card in certain countries, you have to go to an authorized place and you have to show them your passport, and they have to
Mm-hmm.
they know exactly who you are. And
Mm-hmm.
this is sort of like the Orwellian nightmare that we're coming to, which is that they can surveil things at multiple different levels. Bitcoin is our one weapon against all of
Yeah. So, talking about KYCs,
that.
right now, like United States or even here, I live in Spain, by the way. Even
Hmm.
in the EU right now, they are trying to,
Hmm.
well, for a couple of months or even years, they're planning to pass a bill about KYC, but for
Hmm.
cold storage wallets. So,
Hmm.
can you just play people? Why is that a bad idea? I mean,
Yeah, it's kind of a very difficult thing to enforce, and I think the people that are writing these laws think that there's some central entity that controls all of this stuff. In which case, they could just subpoena that one entity and say, "Give us all your data," which is more or less how governments have approached all of this stuff. Is anytime they think something bad is happening, they find the central party that has all of the data and make them give it to them, or say, okay, you need to enforce this and deputize them for the purposes of enforcement or something like that. With Bitcoin, that doesn't exist. So what they're trying to do is enforce something that vast majority of people are just going to ignore because there's no way for them to know how do you KYC something like that? At what
mhm.
juncture? There's no central controller. They can do something with exchanges, but not all Bitcoin flows through exchanges. You can do peer to peer and so on, which is how a lot of Bitcoin exchanging works these days. So, all that said, it's just sort of bureaucrats being bureaucrats, and they don't really understand what Bitcoin is, which is why they're attempting to do something that doesn't really make sense or makes as much sense as a square circle.
You have been in El Salvador several times, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
well, before going into what you were doing there, do you like the country? How was your first experience there? And do you heard about it way before Bitcoin because of Bitcoin? Or how was your first experience there?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that the country existed before, the Bitcoin Beach stuff blew up, but I had no desire to go there or anything
Yeah,
like
of
that
course.
until the Bitcoin stuff happened. And for one reason or another, I couldn't go to the major conference there, but I did go a couple of months later on my own, and I spent a week hanging out and observing all of that. I was pretty impressed with the country and how it was progressing along with all of the Bitcoin stuff. And I visited 6 months later, and this was last summer, and I noticed some changes. And I think this is a credit to the government officials and the people that are actually building the place up.
Hmm.
There are bike lanes in San Salvador, which weren't there before. And it's like, oh, wow, this is new. This is something that I didn't expect. And it's becoming a more livable city. There's construction starting to go up and things like that, which to me is like an indicator. Okay, this is becoming a desirable place to be. So I mean, obviously, it wasn't as developed as some Western countries or whatever. But um, for me, seeing the delta between the first time I went there and the second time I went there, and sort of the rapid change that's happening, impressed me. And that's what gives me a lot of hope for the country because it's not standing still. A lot of places you go once and then you go back and it's pretty much the same. That those are places that are dying or have no vitality whatsoever. But this is an obvious place where things are happening and things are improving, and that's wonderful. I'm happy for the people of El Salvador for that.
I'm glad that you had that. those positive experience there. So you mentioned that you were last summer there, and you held your programming Bitcoin course, right? There.
Mhm.
So, so for people that don't know what is that about, what is programming Bitcoin, your course, and essentially what programming Bitcoin means for people that don't
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm a programmer, and starting in 2013, I learned the protocol and I started doing programming things with it. So, companies need developers to understand Bitcoin so they can program against it and do various things.
Mhm.
And it was a very frustrating experience for me, sort of learning it, because the documentation's all over the place and there's no one really to teach you all of the basics and stuff like that, which is why I started teaching people. Even while I was working for different Bitcoin companies, you get a new developer, didn't know what they were doing, and I would try to explain to them what's going on. And eventually, I just came up with a course uh, and started training developers at these companies. And then I started doing this on my own, offering it to the public, starting in 2017. And I've been running this course ever since as a way to train developers on Bitcoin, because there's enough of a demand in the industry. There's enough of a demand among developers. And that's what I did. Now, the El Salvador one that I did last summer was a bit unique in the sense that this was sponsored by Max and Stacy with different companies to bring more developers to El Salvador, because I mean, you could hire developers from other places, but I think if you really want to get in on Bitcoin, you want more native talent and for
Mhm.
people to really get into it and teach other people. So, they got some scholarships. We put out a call to a lot of people to see if they could qualify, and we trained like 8 different people, and it was a great experience. They I think a few of them. One of them was even like sort of anti Kelly before that, and
Really?
afterwards was like, okay, yeah, just understood the power of it, and he was glad about it. And I told them at the end, like, your country is behind you on this. They want you to really get Bitcoin and contribute to this economy, and you're the vanguard of probably hopefully many more developers that are going to come. So it was a great experience. I enjoyed it, and if I get another chance to do it, I certainly would. And you know the big hard part is really just finding enough candidates that are worthy of scholarships. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to find those people. And I speak English and not Spanish, and obviously, like, having Spanish would be much more integral to getting the word out and stuff like that, and having connections at universities or whatever. So
Yeah.
at some point I would love to do it again with a lot more people and get them all trained.
Oh wow. And you mentioned Bukele, and I also
Mm-hmm.
heard that one of of his brothers took your course, right?
Well, he
Oh,
didn't. He didn't take the course, but I did have like a sort of a question I give to see if people are worthy of a scholarship, and he got it
ah,
wrong. So
okay.
it was just sort of like, okay, this guy could probably be a pretty good coder, but instead he's doing what he can for the people of El Salvador.
Okay. Um, okay, so and have you ever met Bukele like in person or something? How or
I have not. I just met his
Mhm.
brother. I've met several people that are in government, but not
Mhm.
not Bukele himself.
And do you think that Bitcoin eventually will become like a global reserve asset, or do you think it will eventually? And how do you think it's going to evolve? Because we have seen that my country started, and then
Mhm.
The Central African Republic, and how
Mhm.
do you see it that it will evolve?
Yeah, so it's going to be slow going for a while, and then I think it'll happen pretty suddenly. Because for the moment, like everyone uses the dollar as their reserve currency, and until the dollar starts hyperinflating, I think that's what people are going to standardize on. And I've been all over the world, and every single place they'll take the dollar. They don't mind the
Yeah.
dollar in the least, right? Because it's so liquid,
Mhm.
and it's something that everyone will take, and that's sort of its the main appeal about it. But even the dollar is sort of expanding at a pretty fast rate. So we're getting 9-10% inflation on the dollar according to the CPI.
Mhm.
That stuff starts biting into your profit margins and stuff like that, and you need to put it into another asset to store your value. I think that's where it'll really come in. When we see sort of like the first hyperinflating country not going to the dollar but going into Bitcoin, that's when we'll really have made it. But that's going to take a while because, in a sense, the dollar is still pretty stable, and people aren't losing enough money to make it worthwhile to switch to something else. But we're getting there. When inflation's at like 40 or 50%, like you switch to the dollar. But if the dollar is 40 to 50%, then that's when we're really going to see that happen.
Okay, yeah. And another question that I want to ask you is that uh one in one of my previous episodes, someone made a comment about Monero, and I know you don't like shitcoins or altcoins. So for those
Uh,
people, can you explain them what is the difference? But most importantly, I think one of the main questions that people always ask me, and I think you know better the answer, why these all shitcoins or altcoins will never be decentralized as Bitcoin because of the
Yeah,
properties.
because they all have some central single point of failure. Now, if it's something like Ethereum, that's very obvious, right? Somebody issued all of the tokens. There was a pre-mine, there was a pre-sale, and there's somebody making decisions to go to Ethereum 2.0, and there's stakers and all. There's like 18 different levels of single points of failure. With something like Monero, people tend to give it, be a lot more lax about those standards just because, it has privacy and stuff. And that's true. It does have some level of privacy or whatever. But
Mhm.
the fact of the matter is that there is sort of the central developer community that can hard fork whenever they want. And in fact, for a while there, they were hard forking every 6 months. And there was one hard fork in particular where these other three projects said, okay, well, you're going to hard fork, we're going to continue and whatever. And, all of them died, whereas the one that they decreed was Monero kept going. And you have to upgrade, right? If you don't upgrade, then you're no longer on Monero. So somebody decides for you what Monero is instead of you defining it for yourself. With Bitcoin, I run my own node. And if somebody says this isn't Bitcoin, it's something else, I don't have to listen to them. And in fact, this is exactly what happened in 2017, where
Mhm.
a bunch of people said, well, the real Bitcoin is this thing called Bitcoin Cash. And
Mhm.
a large number of people said, no, that's not Bitcoin. You can't do that with Monero. You can't do that with all of these altcoins. The people in charge get to tell you what that coin is. And if you don't upgrade, then you're out of consensus and you don't have any recourse. And they can change the rules whenever they want. So, for example, they can decide all of a sudden, we don't like miners making this much money, so we're going
Mhm.
to change it to this other thing, which is exactly what Ethereum did, and so on. So
Mhm.
it's all coins are really fiat 2.0. So there's still a central controller. They change the rules and do whatever they want. It's just not a government central bank. It's just somebody else, and that's the big difference. So
Mhm.
Bitcoin is decentralized. Everything else is centralized, and this is the big difference that you really need to understand, and something that I hope to eventually write a book about.
Okay, thank you, Jimmy. And going back to El Salvador, because I forgot to ask you a question about it. You probably recently heard that the Texas Bitcoin Foundation and the El Salvador government are opening the second Bitcoin embassy in the world, and it's going to be in Texas. And well, it's involved Max and Stacy and
Mm-hmm.
Natalie Smolensky. And so what I was going to ask you. What are the benefits for both parts, or even why do you think that they're making these Bitcoin embassies, and what are the benefits for both parts that are involved in this project, in those projects?
Yeah, I mean, I was around for the Switzerland one. So I was in Lugano when they opened the sort of Bitcoin embassy there. I think the main idea is that these places are, local governments where they can sort of trade ideas and figure out what works and see if you can sort of tie them together in a way that's beneficial to all parties. And this is just sort of like the main thing about trade that's so beneficial is that one party can give something to the other party that they find more valuable, and vice versa. And this has happened in every human culture. Whenever you have two groups meet, they want to trade, and it benefits everybody. So I think these Bitcoin embassies are ways to sort of benefit everybody that are involved, particularly for government officials. It's for local stuff and local jobs. If you had this resource available and you have closer ties to places that aren't necessarily like right next door or something like that, there can be significant economic benefits. So I think that's the main idea. Of course, I don't really know because
Yeah.
I'm not part of that program, but that's what I would think would be the main thing.
Okay, perfect. Uh, so Jimmy, I told you at the beginning of the podcast that we have a section on the show that we all do with our guests, and it's called Hard Truths. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
send you the link so you can play. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, what the game is, rock, paper, scissors, three times,
Mm-hmm.
and the loser have to pick a random question about that list that I just sent you. It's not related to Bitcoin. Well, our audience already know it's not related about Bitcoin. It's related about our life. There are silly questions, so can people
Uh-huh.
get to know us, because at the end we are all humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure, sure.
so we're going to play it uh, three times, and that's it, and
Mm-hmm.
we get back to the show. So are you
All
ready?
right, so rock, paper. Uh-huh.
When I say scissors, it's we show it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay. 17. All
17.
right.
Let's see.
All
So
right. Why don't you ask me the question so I can
yeah,
answer it?
I'm going to ask you the question. Uh, which was your favorite rock band in high school?
In high school, probably. Well, I didn't really listen to music in high school, which probably sounds weird, but I don't know.
Mhm.
Like I like if I did listen to music, it was Christian music.
Okay.
So yeah, I didn't really listen to other stuff.
Okay, okay. No, it doesn't matter. Okay. And so people, but you see now people are getting to know you.
No,
Okay.
sure.
Uh,
Hmm.
one, I have a prepared question that I wanted to ask you, and it was like,
Hmm.
uh, what do you believe are the most important technical and social challenges that people will need to overcome in the next decade? And how do you see the Bitcoin community addressing these challenges?
Yeah, the main thing is sort of the surveillance state getting very, very strong. The technology is there to sort of process all of this and figure out who's doing what, and it's going to get way more intrusive over the next few decades. I mean, as it is, like Google knows or Apple knows probably significant amounts about you, and all of these payment processors and stuff know a lot about you. So, a lot of that is going to start being used for political oppression and stuff like that, which we kind of saw in Canada with like the trucker stuff. So, I suspect that that's going to be a big part, but, more than that is sort of like this big economic collapse that I think will happen in the next 20 years or so. We've been living on borrowed time for a very long time. And, we saw something of an economic crisis with COVID, but there's probably another one coming that's going to be even worse.
Way worse.
I don't know exactly. Yeah. So those are the realities that I think you have to kind of think about. And both of those are solved with Bitcoin to some degree. If you're saving in Bitcoin, you're not going to have your wealth confiscated away. And if you use Bitcoin, it's going to give you a lot more privacy. So both of those things, I think, are major challenges coming up in the future. And, coincidentally, Bitcoin fixes both of them.
Okay, so I think we have like 5 minutes. So, okay, we're going to start to wrap it up. But before that, what advice will you give to someone who is new to Bitcoin and looking to get involved with all of this?
Yeah, I would say that first level up your game. The more you study, the better you're going to understand this stuff. And usually people don't study it until they buy some. So if you're at zero, get off of zero and then start studying it because it's part of your investment. So if you own a little bit of Bitcoin, you'll be much more motivated to go study it. The more you study, the more it'll make sense, and the more you'll understand sort of like the depth of it, especially the economics aspect and the social change and everything else. That level of sort of discipline to really learn something is rather rare in today's world. And the more you do stuff like that, the better a person you'll become. So generally, I think the main advice would be go level up your game, go study Bitcoin and really get to know it and understand it. And once you do, then, the path forward will hopefully be a lot more clear.
Okay, perfect. And I think one question that everyone, or I don't know, probably they ask you, but why the hat?
Well, I wear the hat for three different reasons. The first one is because I'm from Texas, and if you know anything about Texans, it's that they want you to know that they're from Texas within the first 5 minutes of the meeting. And this is a very effective way for me to let people know that I'm from Texas. I wear the hat, and there you go. It's oh, you're from Texas. That makes sense. Second reason is because I do work in Bitcoin and I speak a lot on this stuff. And I wear the hat because it's a lot like the Wild West. It's got a lot of opportunity, but a lot of danger as well. And it's sort of representing both sides to it. There's, you do have the hardest, most sound money and the best savings vehicle ever. But you also have all these altcoins and scammers and people that want to take your money. So you have to be very careful as well. So, the hat represents both of those things. And finally, the third reason is because I love that 1800s Old West era. And that era was defined, for me at least, with this phrase, go west. Yeah. Go west. Now, what did this phrase mean? Go West was a way of telling young people, hey, you should go out to where the frontier is. Because if you were a baker or a lawyer or an accountant or a cobbler or whatever you were, you had a lot of competition out east where all the people were. If you're a baker, for example, you're competing against bakers that have been baking for 30 years, right? You have to somehow compete with them and come up with better baking so that you can beat them at their own game and steal their customers, something like that. Instead, if you're a young person and you wanted to establish your career, the advice was go western. Why? Because there were lots of people out west, and whatever you did, there was a market for it, and there weren't that many. There wasn't as much competition. The hat is about the frontier. Because if you go out west, go to where the people are going to be and not where people already are, you're going to have a lot more success. You can blaze your own path. You can do things and not have to, wait 40 years to become assistant professor at like a university or something, or wait 40 years to make C-suite, executive at a major company or something like that. You can go and do things on your own. And that's the power of Bitcoin, because it is a new frontier. It's a new place where you can blaze your own path. You don't have to do something that everyone else has done. And that's the message that I tried to give with this hat. And, whenever I talk about it, hopefully people understand what that's all about.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing and also deep, but it's a really amazing message. So, Jimmy's just two last questions, and one is maybe related about your hat because is what has Bitcoin contributed the most in your life?
I think it's not really Bitcoin per se, but it's getting out of the fiat world that's contributed a significant amount. And you don't really realize how much of the fiat world is like corrupting your mind until you're really out of it. So when I first sort of like quit my fiat job and started doing these seminars and stuff like that, I realized just how much of my identity, how much of my opinions, how many of my thoughts were tied to the job that I had, and how much I conformed to other things instead of examining things from first principles. So coming out of that and sort of doing things on my own, it really sort of like made me think about almost everything in a new way. And that's been extremely valuable to me because I think I've become a lot more authentic. I think I've become a lot freer in my opinions and understanding who I am instead of sort of conforming to what I think other people want to hear. And unfortunately, in a fiat world, a lot of people do that for a very long time. So this has been very good for my soul to have that perspective.
Okay. And the last question, Jimmy, is that what are your personal goals for this year or even with Bitcoin?
I mean, I'm traveling right now, and it's to get back home safely. So that's going to take a few more months. But the main one is writing a book. I'm finishing it up, and hopefully will be out sometime in September, something like that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's a Bitcoin book, so that'll be a fun one. Yeah, those would be the main things.
Okay, perfect. So Jimmy, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time and thank you for giving us your perspective and also your knowledge about Bitcoin.
Thank you.
Okay, see you guys the next week. Ciao.